I got my spoiled sister kissing my boyfriend just before her wedding. I told her fiancé, thinking he would stay silent, but he shocked everyone at the wedding when he revealed the truth. From the first signs, I began to feel that something was wrong. My sister, Sarah, suddenly became much too familiar with Tom, my boyfriend. At first, her actions seemed harmless, nothing particularly suspicious. She would excessively praise Tom, laughing at his jokes that weren't even that funny. The small gestures like placing a hand on his shoulder or giving him lingering glances made me uneasy. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things, telling myself it was just her excitement about the upcoming wedding, but I couldn't shake off the discomfort. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it kept building up. Every time they interacted, I felt more and more disturbed, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was just being overly sensitive, but there was a nagging feeling inside me that told me something wasn't right. It was like a dark cloud that hung over me, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. I could no longer dismiss these feelings, even though I wanted to believe that I was just imagining things. The more I watched, the clearer it became that something wasn't as it should be. Although I've told Tom about my concerns, he still couldn't understand the severity of what I'm feeling. A part of me still hoped he would see things the way I do, but another part of me is afraid if he doesn't believe me, what will happen to this relationship? That sense of being lost keeps haunting me. When I talked about Sarah's intimate actions with him, Tom just shook his head and smiled gently, as if I were imagining everything. He said that I was just overreacting because she's about to get married, and those actions were just the excitement of a future bride. He didn't understand how it felt to be abandoned and deceived right within my own family. Even though I didn't want to become a paranoid person, the more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to be exactly as I had suspected. Why would my sister behave so excessively? Could the closeness between her and Tom just be normal friendliness? The answers Tom gave didn't reassure me. I wanted to trust him, to believe that I was just being too sensitive, but that feeling kept growing stronger. I could feel the change in our relationship, and it wasn't something I was imagining. Why couldn't he understand me, pay attention to the little things I had noticed? The more it went on, the more I felt like an outsider in my own relationship. I began to feel lonelier than ever. Every time we were together, I couldn't help but notice Sarah's gestures toward Tom. She always found ways to make contact with him, even if it was just a light touch on his arm or a look filled with meaning. These things couldn't just be coincidences. Yet, when I shared it with Tom, he denied everything, saying I was just imagining a story that wasn't true. This feeling of being ignored is truly uncomfortable. He couldn't see what I saw, couldn't feel the tension growing between them. His rejection made me feel like I was being pushed into a corner where my emotions weren't being acknowledged, where I couldn't share what I was going through. The more I tried to explain, the more I felt like I was being shut out. Tom didn't believe me. He couldn't see the truth in what I was trying to clarify. I wondered if I was just too sensitive. But how could I ignore such suggestive actions? It felt like I was fighting this battle alone in this relationship, and that loneliness clung to me. I didn't know how to get past this fear, especially when the one person I trusted the most couldn't understand me. This contradiction made me feel exhausted. I began to doubt whether I could continue this relationship, as trust was slowly breaking down day by day. I couldn't just keep ignoring it, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't continue living in this constant state of doubt and unease. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The constant nagging feeling in my gut was unbearable. So I decided to confront Sarah. I didn't want to create a scene, but it was clear to me now that I had to face the truth, even if it hurt. After all, how could I continue to ignore something so obvious? That evening, I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee. She agreed, and we arranged to meet at a small cafe. I was nervous, my hands trembling as I stirred my drink. She arrived, chatting happily about wedding plans, completely unaware of what was building up inside me. As I listened to her, the tension in my chest grew. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to say something. I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice shaking with urgency. "We need to talk about Tom." Sarah's face froze, confusion flashing across her features. "What do you mean?" she asked, still oblivious to the storm brewing. I couldn't keep it in anymore. "I've noticed how you've been acting around him, Sarah. It's making me uncomfortable." I watched her face closely as I spoke, her expression changing from confusion to surprise, then to a hint of defensiveness. She immediately denied everything, insisting that I was overreacting. "I'm not flirting with him. I'm just being friendly," she said, and I could tell she was starting to feel cornered. I wasn't backing down. "You're crossing a line, Sarah," I said, my voice firm despite the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. "You've been acting in a way that makes it clear you're interested in him. I don't care if you don't realize it, but it's hurtful to me." Her response was immediate anger, replaced the confusion in her eyes. "You're crazy," she snapped. "You're being paranoid. I'm just being nice. What's wrong with that?" The defensiveness in her voice made my heart sink even more, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let this slide anymore. I continued. "It's not just being friendly, Sarah. You've been finding excuses to be near him, to touch him, to laugh at all his jokes, Evan. The ones that aren't funny. I know what you're doing." I could see the anger rising in her face flushing with frustration. She looked like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're accusing me of things that aren't true," she yelled. And in that moment, I knew the conversation was going to take a turn I hadn't anticipated. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is someone who is hurting their sister," I said, the words cutting through the air between us. "This needs to stop, Sarah, right now." I could see her struggling to hold back tears, but I didn't have time for her to feel sorry for herself. I had to protect myself, even if it meant confronting her in a way I never thought I would. "If you can't respect me, then we're done," I said, my voice trembling but firm. That was when she stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm not sitting here and listening to this ridiculous nonsense," she shouted, her voice cracking with anger. She turned and stormed out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there, feeling as if the last shred of my family had just walked out the door. I sat there in disbelief, my heart racing and my mind spiraling with thoughts of what had just happened. I'd hoped for some kind of resolution, some kind of understanding, but instead I was left alone, questioning everything. The next few days were a blur. I felt as if I were trapped in an emotional limbo, unable to move forward or backward. The confrontation with Sarah had left a wound in my heart that wouldn't heal. My mind kept racing back to that moment in the cafe when everything fell apart. I kept replaying her anger, her denial, and her refusal to accept responsibility for what she had done. I was devastated, but I knew that things had changed irreparably between us. Meanwhile, Tom, the person I thought I could trust more than anyone, wasn't helping. He kept telling me that I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But with each passing day, the pain in my chest grew heavier. The more he tried to reassure me, the less I believed him. The distance between us had become palpable, and the tension in our relationship was unbearable. I had tried to talk to him, to get him to understand why I was so upset, but it felt like he was just brushing off my concerns. The worst part was how alone I felt. It wasn't just that I was losing trust in Tom and Sarah, but I also felt like I was losing my own family. My parents, who had always been there for me, started to question my judgment. They saw Sarah's distress and thought I was being too harsh. They didn't understand the depth of the hurt I was feeling. My mother even called me, asking if I could apologize to Sarah for the way I confronted her. How could I apologize for standing up for myself? How could they not see that my pain was valid? I felt like I was drowning, trying to keep my head above water, but the weight of their expectations and their failure to support me was making it harder and harder to breathe. Every time I went home, it felt like a battlefield. My parents tried to act like nothing had happened, but I could feel the tension in the air. They didn't know how to handle the situation, and neither did I. I just wanted everything to go back to normal, but normal was long gone. I wasn't sure if I could ever repair the damage between us, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. Then came the final blow. The day of Sarah's wedding arrived. I was supposed to be there, standing by her side as her maid of honor, but I couldn't do it. How could I stand there and smile, knowing the truth? The idea of watching Sarah walk down the aisle while everything had been torn apart was unbearable. So I made the decision to stay away. I couldn't be a part of that lie. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when nothing was. As the wedding day drew nearer, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. I was relieved not to be part of it, but the guilt weighed heavily on me. What if I had been too harsh? What if I had overreacted? But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I had done what I had to do to protect myself. even if it meant losing my sister, my boyfriend, and the respect of my family. I could only hope that one day they would understand why I had to make this choice. Until then, I had to move on to try and rebuild my life piece by piece, despite the heartache. The following days felt like a never-ending storm. I couldn't escape the whirlwind of emotions that kept crashing against me. The wedding was approaching, and the more I tried to ignore the truth, the harder it became to bear. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I had lost something precious, something I would never get back. My relationship with Tom had already crumbled, and now I was starting to lose my connection with Sarah too. The distance between us had become too great, and no matter how hard I tried to fix it, the rift seemed too wide to bridge. It was on the eve of the wedding when I felt the finality of it all. I had done everything I could to salvage my relationship with both of them. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My heart felt heavy, and yet the anger was starting to fade, replaced by a dull ache that seemed to settle deep within me. I had made the decision to stop trying, to stop fighting for something that wasn't worth it anymore. There was no way I could stand by Sarah's side at the wedding, knowing what I knew. It would have been too much to bear, too much of a lie. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about what had happened, about how everything had spiraled out of control. I had never imagined that I would find myself in this situation, watching my own sister betray me and realizing that my boyfriend had been a part of it. It felt like my world had shattered and there was no way to put the pieces back together. But the hardest part of it all was the guilt. Guilt for not being there for Sarah. Guilt for not finding a way to make things right between us. And yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't have done anything differently. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had hurt me in a way that left no room for forgiveness. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, even if it meant losing her forever. The wedding day came, and I stayed home, unable to bring myself to be part of the facade. I couldn't bear to see them, to watch Sarah walk down the aisle with Tom. I thought about the moment when everything would be revealed, when Mark would know the truth, and I felt a sickening sense of inevitability. I knew it'd be a disaster, but part of me felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that the truth was finally coming out. The call I received later that day only confirmed what I already knew. Mark had called off the wedding. It was like a cruel twist of fate, a moment that should have brought some sense of closure, but instead, it left me feeling even more empty. Emma, my cousin, had called to tell me the news, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. Mark had stood in front of everyone and announced that he couldn't marry Sarah because of the betrayal. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt nothing. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, unable to do anything to stop it. Sarah was left standing there, her world falling apart around her. And though part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, to feel that justice had been done, all I could feel was an overwhelming sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to end. I never imagined it would come to this, but now there was no going back. All I could do was keep moving forward, no matter how painful it was. After everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare. The guilt and confusion continued to haunt me as the wedding day approached. Even though I knew I had made the right decision by stepping away, the pain was unbearable. I had cut ties with Tom, I had confronted Sarah, and yet nothing seemed to be getting any better. The more I tried to accept the reality of the situation, the more it felt like I was sinking deeper into a sea of regret and sorrow. I kept asking myself whether I had done the right thing. Did I overreact? Was I too harsh with Sarah? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the answer was clear. I had trusted the wrong people, and they had betrayed me in the worst possible way. There was no way to undo the damage they had caused. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine anymore. I couldn't act like the relationship with Sarah and Tom would ever go back to what it once was. I had to accept that I couldn't force them to understand, and I couldn't make them see the depth of my hurt. The worst part was the silence. The phone calls stopped, the messages stopped, and no one seemed to care to check on me. I didn't know how to feel anymore. Part of me just wanted to disappear, to escape the pain that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I wanted to forget about the wedding, forget about Sarah and Tom, and move on with my life. But I knew that wasn't possible. The events had been too monumental, too painful to simply move on from. I still hadn't spoken to Sarah since our confrontation. I knew she was hurting, but so was I. I tried to call her a few times, but she never answered. The silence between us was deafening. I couldn't understand how she could just shut me out like that, how she could turn her back on me after everything we had been through together. But deep down, I knew why. She was ashamed and probably too proud to admit it. Then came the unexpected call from my cousin Emma. Her voice was filled with urgency and excitement, and I immediately knew that something significant had happened. She told me everything that had unfolded at the wedding. Mark had stood in front of all the guests and announced that he couldn't marry Sarah, revealing everything that had happened. My heart skipped a beat when I heard the news. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because I had been right all along, but sorrow because I had never wanted things to go this far. I had never wanted to see my family torn apart like this. Sarah was devastated. She was left standing there, alone and humiliated in front of everyone. Emma described her as pale and trembling, unable to say a word. It was like watching a movie, except it wasn't fiction. It was my life, and everything I had feared had come true. I thought I would feel vindicated, but instead I felt emptier than ever. The truth had been exposed, but it had cost me everything. It had cost me my sister, my relationship with Tom, and the trust of my family. As I processed what Emma had told me, I realized that the pain was far from over. I would have to face Sarah again eventually, and I would have to deal with the consequences of everything that had happened. But at least now I knew that the truth was finally out there and I could begin to heal. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick, but it was the only way forward. And so I made a decision. I would no longer let this situation define me. I would take control of my life, even if it meant walking away from everything I had once known. The days following the shocking revelation felt like an endless roller coaster of emotions. I was still processing everything, what had happened with Sarah, what Tom had done, and how all of this had destroyed my sense of family. I kept replaying the wedding in my mind, imagining Sarah walking down the aisle with Tom standing by her side, but now it all seemed like a cruel joke. The idea of witnessing it in person was too much for me to bear. How could I attend her wedding, knowing what I knew, knowing the truth about their betrayal? I decided that I couldn't go. I had made my peace with it, or at least I thought I had. But when the day finally came, I was flooded with an unexpected wave of dread and guilt. My heart ached as I imagined Sarah's face, her excitement about the wedding, and how she must have felt when everything came crashing down. Part of me still wanted to be there for her, to support her, but then I remembered how deep her betrayal cut. How could I stand by her side, knowing she had hurt me so deeply? In the days leading up to the wedding, I became more and more isolated. The phone calls stopped coming, and I stopped reaching out to anyone. My parents, still oblivious to the full extent of what had happened, thought I was just being difficult. They didn't understand why I wasn't supporting Sarah. How could they? They hadn't witnessed what I had. They didn't know what it felt like to have someone you love betray you in such a devastating way. I wanted to be angry at them for not taking my side, but deep down, I knew they were just trying to hold on to their image of a perfect family. They didn't want to face the ugly truth, and neither did Sarah. It was easier for them to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine, but I couldn't pretend. I couldn't live in the same world where my sister was willing to hurt me for the sake of her own happiness. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The day of the wedding arrived, and I spent it alone in a hotel room, far from the chaos. I couldn't bear the thought of being there, sitting in that church while everyone celebrated a lie. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Tom together, standing there as if nothing had happened. It was too much. Later that evening, I received a call from Emma. Her voice was shaky, and I could sense the disbelief in her words. She explained what had unfolded at the wedding. Mark had stood in front of everyone and announced that he was calling off the wedding. He revealed everything, the betrayal, the lies, and left Sarah standing there, alone at the altar. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a sense of triumph that I felt. No, it was a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Sarah had been humiliated, left in front of all those people, her dreams shattered. I should have felt happy that the truth had been exposed, that justice had been served, but all I felt was emptiness. This wasn't how I imagined things would unfold. I never wanted to see my sister suffer, but I couldn't ignore what she had done. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. The fallout from this moment would ripple through our family for a long time. The truth had come out, but it had cost so much more than I had ever anticipated. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I could move forward, leave the past behind, and try to heal, although I knew it would be a long, painful process. I had to let go of the people who had betrayed me, no matter how much it hurt. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward finding peace. After that event, I spent the entire following week living in utter exhaustion. The emptiness, the pain that couldn't be erased, gnawed at every moment of my day. My life now felt like an unfinished book, unable to continue, unable to forget. All that I had once believed in, the relationships I thought would stand the test of time, had now shattered like broken glass underfoot. Every time I thought about Sarah's wedding, I felt a lump in my throat. It was as if everything I had endured, all I had given, all the sacrifices I made, had become meaningless. I couldn't imagine Sarah walking down the aisle with Tom, knowing everything that had transpired between them. That wedding, to me, had now become nothing more than a painful event, a testament to betrayal. That day, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't live in this darkness forever. Yes, I had let go of Tom, ended that relationship. But now, all I could do was face the truth and find a way to heal. I couldn't continue avoiding my family, living in shame and self-doubt. I had to face my parents, Sarah, everyone. But my heart still clenched at the thought of it. It felt like everything had crumbled. I called Mark, Sarah's fiancé. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe because I had no other choice. Everything had come to light, and I thought he needed to know the truth, even if he didn't want to hear it. When he picked up, his voice was full of worry. What's going on? Why haven't you been in touch? Everyone's worried. At that moment, I just bit my lip, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark, there's something I need to tell you about Sarah. Silence filled the air, and I could feel the tension on the other end of the line. He asked me, his voice trembling, "What is it? Is something big going on?" I took a deep breath, then began to recount everything, every little detail about what Sarah had done with Tom, every intimate gesture, every look, everything I had witnessed. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to speak the brutal truth. After hearing it all, Mark stayed silent for a long while. I didn't know what he was thinking, but his deep sigh felt like an acknowledgement of the inevitable disappointment. "Thank you for telling me, but I need time to think." His words hit me hard, but I couldn't blame him. After all, he was the one who'd been betrayed. He had every right to decide how to move forward with his life. After that call, I didn't feel relieved, didn't feel any comfort. On the contrary, I felt like I had pushed everything into a dead end. At this point, no forgiveness, no explanation, could ease the pain. The broken pieces of my heart were too big now, and I didn't know how to heal them. Though I had decided not to attend the wedding, I still couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Guilt and anger swelled inside me. On the wedding day, I received a call from Emma, my close cousin, her voice full of excitement. "You won't believe what's happening, Sarah and Mark. This is unbelievable." I asked her what was going on, and Emma told me that Mark had publicly called off the engagement right there in the wedding hall. My feelings at that moment were indescribable. Part of me felt a sense of satisfaction, as if justice had been served, but another part of me felt pain. There was Sarah, standing there, abandoned, completely shocked, unsure of what to do, and me, I could only watch from afar, unable to help her. My whole family was now in turmoil, all because of one wrong decision made by Sarah and Tom. Even though the truth had come out, I couldn't escape the feeling of loss. Sometimes, the truth isn't what brings relief, it just makes the wound deeper. And I didn't know if I could ever fully recover, but at least I had moved past that pain. And I knew that, even though everything had changed, I would never go back to my old life.